In this video, we are going to talk about the concept of static and dynamic backend in DataPower. The concept of a static and dynamic backend in DataPower is very easy to understand. Static backend means whenever you define the backend at the design time, that becomes the static backend. The dynamic backend means whenever you define the backend at runtime, it's a dynamic backend scenario. Let's see it with simple configuration. Here I have a test MPGW, and you can see that I have two ways to specify the backend, static and dynamic. If I choose the static backend, a simple text box will appear over here where I am supposed to define a backend. This is the backend that I'm defining at the design time, and hence it's a static backend. If I select the dynamic backend, then this box will go away. The multi-protocol gateway will assume that you are going to define the backend as part of the processing policy, and that's what we call dynamic backend. Static and dynamic backend are different scenarios than service orchestration. Some people get confused between dynamic backend and service orchestration. Service orchestration is not the dynamic backend, and there are different techniques which are used for service orchestration and for the dynamic backend. How do I define a dynamic backend? Well, you define it as part of the processing policy, but in processing policy, how? To tell DataPower to go to a specific backend, you need to set a particular service variable. You can set that variable over here. You can drag and drop advanced over here. There is an option to do the set variable. Click on set next. You can see here the service variable that is responsible for that is routing URL. So if you set this variable to a particular backend, for example, which I set here, I'm instructing multi-protocol gateway to reach out to this particular backend or route the traffic to this particular backend. And hence, technically, I have achieved the dynamic routing. But as you can see, this approach has a glaring problem. The problem is that where is my decision criteria? In the beginning, I mentioned that all dynamic backend are defined using some kind of decision criteria, meaning that, for example, as part of incoming request, you're sending some kind of maybe environment variable. Environment is equal to date or set or UAT or production. And here in this rule, you want to capture that, and based on which you may have some configuration file from which you want to pick the value and you want to route it to the appropriate backend. So where is that criteria over here? How do I define that criteria and then select the backend? Well, that can be also done using this configuration, but if you have such a scenario, you are better off with programming. So you got to drag and drop transform action. Here, I intend to upload an XSLT. You can double click it and you can upload an XSLT. The XSLT will have all the decision criteria, all the logic to find out the correct backend and then instruct multi-protocol gateway to go to that backend. How that XSLT looks like. So here is a sample XSLT that I have created for this purpose, and I would like to explain it. So here you can see that first I'm trying to capture the criteria based on which the backend needs to be selected. This criteria can be anything as part of which is coming as part of a request. For example, it can be parameter which is coming as part of query parameters. It can be an HTTP header. It can be incoming URI. It can be any particular data which is coming as part of message body. So it can be anything any data or metadata coming as part of incoming request. Here, I have tried to capture the incoming URI. Now that I have the data based on which the decision needs to be made, I'm making the decision with this XSL choose statement. So you can see that there is a test criteria that tests it according to a particular rule, and based on which you can see that I'm setting the routing URL. So the core concept is that setting the routing URL tells multi-protocol gateway where to route the request to, and hence this is the dynamic backend. You can set the backend statically, or you can fetch it from a configuration file. It all depends upon your scenario, but the idea is that you have a way in which you can write or code your logic and instruct the multi-protocol gateway to go to the backend. That concludes the dynamic and static backend decision. And that's it for today.